The Alpha King thought she would beg to return, until morning came and his wife had vanished. A true real-life story. Some people leave with noise. They slam doors. They cry in the hallway. They make sure you feel every second of their leaving. But then there are people who leave quietly. No scene, no warning, no goodbye note on the kitchen counter. And those are the ones that change you forever. Because you don't realize they are gone until you reach for them and your hand finds nothing. This is a story about one of those quiet leavings. It is a story about a woman who gave everything she had to a man who never once asked how she was doing. A woman who cooked his favorite meals, ironed his shirts, rearranged her whole life around his schedule, and smiled through all of it. A woman who, for 7 full years, told herself that this was just what love looked like when it grew up. And it is a story about the morning he woke up and reached for her, and she was gone. Not gone to her mother's house, not gone to cool down. Gone. Completely, deliberately, quietly gone. He had told himself she would never leave. He was certain of it the way some men are certain of things they have never actually tested. He believed that she needed him too much, loved him too much, had given up too much to ever walk away. He believed that even if things got bad enough, she would come to him first. She would talk to him first. And if she ever did try to leave, she would beg to come back within a week. He was wrong about almost everything. Let's go back to the beginning, because every ending has one. When they first met, she was 26 years old and working as an architect for a mid-size firm. She was the kind of person who remembered small details. Your coffee order, the name of your younger sibling you mentioned once, the date of something you said was important to you. People loved her for that. She made you feel like you were the only person in the room, and she did it without trying. He was 33, already running his own business, already used to people orbiting around him. The first time he saw her, she was at a friend's dinner party, laughing at something someone said, and he told his friend later that he had never seen anyone so alive-looking. That was the word he used, alive. Like most people were switched to low-power mode, and she was running at full brightness. He pursued her seriously. Flowers sent to her office on random Tuesdays. Long phone calls that started at 9 and somehow ended at 2 in the morning. Weekends planned with a kind of careful attention that she had never experienced from a man before. He noticed things. Early on, he noticed everything. She fell in love the way a person falls when they have been careful their whole life, and then they decide, just once, to let themselves fall. Fully, without holding anything back. They got married 18 months after they met. The wedding was small because that is what she wanted, a small garden ceremony, close family and friends, her grandmother in the front row. He agreed without complaint. That day she thought, this is a man who listens. This is a man who pays attention. She was right. He was that man. For a while. The shift did not happen overnight. That is the thing people never understand about these kinds of marriages. Nobody wakes up on a random Thursday and decides to stop seeing their partner as a full human being. It happens in tiny steps, so small you barely notice each one. The first year of their marriage was genuinely good. He was still building his business, but he made time. They cooked together on Sunday evenings. They argued sometimes, about money, about whose family to visit during the holidays, about small domestic things. But they always talked it out. She felt heard. She felt like her opinions landed somewhere. But then the business started growing faster than he had expected. A major contract came in at the end of that first year. Then another. Then investors started paying attention, and almost without either of them noticing, he started spending more time at the office and less time at the table. At first she was understanding. She told herself, this is temporary. He is building something for both of us. She told herself this was the sacrifice that came with being married to an ambitious man, and she had known he was ambitious when she chose him, so this was not something she was allowed to complain about. That thought, the idea that she was not allowed to complain, was the first crack. She just did not see it yet. By the second year of their marriage, he had stopped asking how her day was. Not in a mean way, not in a deliberate, I don't care about you way. He simply stopped. He would come home, eat whatever was on the table, talk about work for 40 minutes, check his phone, and go to sleep. She would sit across from him and have entire conversations in her head that never made it out of her mouth. She told herself, he is tired. He is carrying a lot. I should be supportive right now. She told herself that for another 2 years. In the 3rd year of their marriage, something happened that she still thinks about. Her firm offered her a project lead on a major mixed-use development in another city. It was the kind of opportunity she had been working toward for her entire career. Her name on a significant project. A real step forward. She was so excited when she called him that she was talking faster than usual, and she had to stop herself and slow down so the words made sense. He listened. Then he asked how long she would need to be away. She said it would probably be about 3 or 4 months of back-and-forth travel, but she could manage it. She had already thought through the logistics. He said, "What about the house?" "Just that. What about the house?" She explained that she had it figured out. She had made a list. She had thought about everything, but even as she was talking, she could feel something deflating, because he had not asked about the project. He had not asked what the project was. He had not asked what it meant to her, or how long she had wanted something like this. The first thing he thought about was the house. She turned down the project. She told her boss it was a family timing issue. She told herself she made the right choice. She did not allow herself to think about it for very long after that, because when she did, something in her chest felt too heavy. By year 4, she had become very good at being invisible in her own home. Not invisible like she was ignored in an obvious way. More like she had learned to take up exactly as much space as he had available for her, which got smaller every year. She stopped sharing things that excited her because they were usually met with a polite nod and a conversation he had already moved on from. She stopped suggesting plans because he would often cancel them at the last minute, and she had grown tired of the disappointment. She stopped saying, "I need us to talk," because the last 3 times she had said that, the conversation had somehow ended with her comforting him about his work stress. She started spending a lot of time on her own, reading, taking long walks, calling her sister more than she used to. She told her sister she was fine whenever her sister asked. She told herself she was fine whenever she asked herself. Her sister did not believe her, but she did not push, because she had learned that her sister would only talk when she was ready. At his company events, the dinners, the awards nights, the client parties that happened more and more frequently, she stood beside him and smiled, and made conversation, and was charming and warm, and everyone told him how lucky he was to have her. He would nod and agree, and put his hand on her back in a way that felt like he was gesturing at a painting he owned. One evening, at one of these events, a woman she had just met leaned over and said quietly, "You are so patient. How do you do it?" She had laughed and said she did not know what the woman meant. But she did know. She knew exactly what the woman meant. In year 5, she asked him if they could see a couples counselor. She had rehearsed how she would bring it up. She had thought about timing, about wording, about not making it sound like an accusation. She sat across from him one evening when the house was quiet and the dishes were done, and she said, "I think it would really help us to talk to someone together. I feel like there are things between us that we keep not saying, and I think someone could help us say them." He looked at her for a moment, then he smiled in a way that was almost kind and said, "We don't have those kinds of problems. Other people need that. We're fine." She did not argue. She nodded and cleared the table. That night, she started keeping a journal. On the first page, she wrote one sentence, "Things I no longer say out loud." She filled it faster than she expected. Now we arrive at the night that changed everything. And you need to understand, it was not a dramatic night. There was no big fight, no screaming, no thrown plates or slammed doors. It was, by every measure, an ordinary Tuesday. She had cooked his favorite meal. She does not know exactly why. It was not an anniversary, not a birthday. She had just decided, standing in the kitchen that afternoon, that she wanted to try one more time, to create an evening that felt like something, to sit across from each other and actually be present together. She set the table properly. She lit a candle. She put on music quietly in the background. She changed out of her house clothes into something she thought he might notice. At 7 o'clock she sent him a message. "Dinner is ready when you are." He replied, "Running late, don't wait." She waited. At 8 o'clock she ate alone. At 9, she blew out the candle and put the food in the fridge. At 10:30 she heard his key in the door. He came in, loosened his tie, looked at the table still laid out and said, "You kept the table like this?" Not warmly, more like mild confusion at a thing that did not make sense to him. She asked if he was hungry. He said he had eaten with a client. He sat on the sofa and picked up his phone. She sat at the table, the candle holder still in front of her, and she looked at him for a long time. Then she said something she had not planned to say. It came out quietly, without drama, because that is how she said everything by that point. She said, "Do you actually see me? Not as the person who keeps this house running, not as the woman you bring to your work events, but actually me. Do you know what I'm thinking about these days? Do you know if I'm happy?" He looked up from his phone, and she could genuinely see, that he was about to say something patient and slightly irritated, something that would end this conversation quickly. She had seen that particular look 500 times. He said, "Serena, please, not tonight. I've had a long day." He used a different name. He never called her by her name in that tone, unless he was tired of talking to her. And then he looked back at his phone. She sat there for another minute. Then she got up, washed the dishes, said goodnight to the back of his head, and went to bed. She did not cry. That surprised her. She had cried so many times in the years before that she had expected she would cry now, at what felt like a very clear and definite ending. But she did not. She lay in the dark and felt something very calm and very final settle over her. She thought, "I have spent 7 years trying to get a man to see me. And tonight I understand, it is not that he cannot see me, it is that he has decided, without ever saying it out loud, that I am simply part of the background." She thought, "I am not going to spend another 7 years being part of someone else's background." She did not make a dramatic decision that night. She simply decided to stop pretending that things were fine. And that small decision, made quietly in the dark, started everything that came next. She called her sister 3 days later, not crying, which is the first thing her sister noticed. She just said, "I need your help finding a flat. Nothing big, just something that's mine. Don't ask me too much yet. Just help me look." Her sister said, "Okay." And that was it. Her sister did not lecture her, or say, "Are you sure?" or push her to try one more time. Her sister just said, "Okay." And that single syllable, that complete, uncomplicated "okay," made her cry for the first time in weeks. Because she suddenly realized how hungry she had been for someone to simply believe her without asking for evidence. They searched quietly for 11 days. She looked on her lunch breaks. Her sister sent her links in the evenings. And they talked logistics on the phone after he was asleep. She was practical and clear-headed about the whole process, in a way that surprised even her. She was not falling apart. She was not second-guessing herself. She had, it seemed, already done all the grieving somewhere between year 3 and year 6, without realizing that was what she was doing. They found a flat on the second floor of a quiet building about 20 minutes from the home she had shared with him. 1 bedroom. Small living area, a little balcony that looked out over a side street with a tree on the pavement. She paid the deposit from her own savings account. This is something people always ask about later. How did she have savings he did not know about? The answer is simple: he never asked. He had a generous view of himself as a provider, so he never questioned where her money went or how she managed it. She had quietly, carefully, over years, kept some of her freelance income in an account in her name only. She had not done it with a plan to leave. She had done it because somewhere deep inside she had always understood that a person should have something that is only theirs. He went to a 3-day business conference in another city. She moved in 2 trips while he was gone. First trip, her journals, her books, the photographs that were only of her, not wedding photos, not couple photos, but photos of her as herself. Her grandmother's ring, a small painting she had bought years ago that he had never commented on. her drafting materials from her architecture work that had been sitting in a box in the spare room because there had never been anywhere she felt she could set them up. Second trip, her clothes, her toiletries, her coffee things, the one good kitchen knife she had bought herself, and a plant she had been keeping alive on the windowsill for 2 years that he had stepped on twice without noticing. She left his house exactly as she found it, clean, tidy, everything in place. She even changed the bed sheets. She wanted him to walk in and not immediately know. She wanted to be able to imagine his face in that specific moment of realization, when he looked around a perfect house and noticed that everything was the same except she was not in it. She left no letter. She thought about writing one for a while. She had composed versions of it in her head for days. But in the end, she realized she had already spent 7 years explaining herself to a man who was not listening. She was not going to write him another explanation. If he had questions, he knew what she had been trying to tell him. The answers were in every dinner that went cold, every conversation that ended with her comforting him. Every time he said not tonight, and she said okay, and went to bed with everything still inside her. She left her old phone in the bedside drawer. Her number, his number, 7 years of messages, all of it, in that drawer. She had a new phone, new number, and she had only given it to 4 people: her sister, her parents, her closest friend, and her former boss who had offered her that project 3 years ago, and who, when she reached out 2 weeks ago, said the door was still open if she ever wanted to come back to architecture. She locked the door of her flat, leaned against it, and looked at her one bedroom, her small sofa, her one kitchen knife, her plant on the windowsill, and the view of the tree on the street below. And she felt something she had not felt in so long that it took her a moment to name it. She felt like herself. He came back from his conference on a Tuesday morning, exactly 11 days after she had moved out. He noticed nothing at first. He walked in, put down his bag, went to the kitchen. He noticed she was not there, which was not unusual because she sometimes worked from a co-working space in the mornings. He put the kettle on. He checked his phone. After 20 minutes he called her. Her phone rang from inside the bedroom. He stood still for a moment in the hallway, confused. He went to the bedroom and found her old phone on the bedside table, face up, ringing with his name on the screen. He picked it up. He stared at it. He called her sister. Her sister picked up on the first ring and said, calmly, "She is safe. She is okay. She does not want to talk right now. Please give her some time." He asked where she was. Her sister said, "She will contact you when she is ready. Please give her time." He hung up. He stood in the middle of the bedroom that still smelled faintly like her perfume, in the house she had kept immaculate, and he tried to process what was happening. His first reaction was disbelief. He walked from room to room as though she might be in one of them. He checked the spare room, the bathroom, the little reading corner she had set up by the window. Then he went back to the bedroom and opened the wardrobe and stood there looking at the empty side where her clothes had been, and that was the moment it became real. She had not just stepped out. She had left. He went through several phases in the first 2 weeks, and none of them were particularly clean or logical. The first phase was confidence. He told his closest friend that she had made her point, and she would be back in a few days. He said he understood she was upset and he would give her space to cool down. He said it the way you talk about a minor inconvenience you have already mentally resolved. His friend listened and said nothing. The second phase was irritation. When she did not come back after 5 days, he became frustrated. He told himself she was being dramatic. He told himself this was an overreaction to a situation that could have been handled with a simple conversation. He wanted to speak to her and tell her this, but he could not reach her, and the fact that he could not reach her made the irritation worse. His friend tried, gently, to suggest that maybe there was more to this than he was seeing. He did not want to hear it. He changed the subject. The third phase came about 10 days in, and it was quieter and harder. He started noticing things around the house. The way it felt different in the evenings, not just empty, but a particular kind of empty that he could not explain. The kettle was in the same place. The sofa was the same. The television was still there. But something about the air in the house had changed, and he did not know how to name it. He started doing things he had not done in years. He tried to cook dinner one evening and stood in front of the fridge for a long time because he realized he genuinely did not know what they kept in the fridge, what was always there, what she bought, what was a staple. He had eaten in this house for 7 years, and he did not know what they stocked. He ate toast that evening. He went to his mother's house that weekend, which was unusual for him. He sat in her kitchen the way he had sat as a child, and his mother made him tea and waited for him to talk. He said, eventually, she left. His mother nodded slowly. He said, "You don't seem surprised." His mother looked at him for a moment and said, very carefully, "I hoped she wouldn't have to, but I'm not surprised." He drove home in silence and sat in the driveway for a long time. While he was sitting in driveways and eating toast, she was doing something else entirely. She was sleeping. This sounds small. It was not small. She had not slept properly in years. Not the real, deep sleep where you wake up and feel like you actually rested. She had been sleeping in a state of permanent low-level alertness, always aware of the sound of his key in the lock, always aware of whether the atmosphere of the house was good or tense, always the person calibrating the temperature of the room. In her flat, for the first time in a long time, she slept 8 hours and woke up and lay there without immediately thinking about what the day required of her. She just lay there. It felt strange, and then it felt extraordinary. In the first week, she mostly existed quietly. She cooked only what she wanted to eat, which turned out to be very simple things: eggs and toast and soup, because when you cook only for yourself without expectation, you learn what you actually want. She took long baths. She sat on her small balcony in the evenings and watched the tree on the street and the people walking past, and she did not think too much about anything. In the second week, she called an old friend she had slowly stopped seeing over the last few years. The friend answered immediately and said, "I have been thinking about you," and they talked for 2 hours, and it felt like no time had passed, and also like a great deal of time had passed, which is what happens when you reconnect with a version of yourself you had put away. In the third week, she emailed her former boss about coming back to the firm part-time. He replied the same evening, "I was hoping you would reach out. Come in whenever you are ready. There is a project that has been waiting for someone like you." She sat at her kitchen table and read that email 3 times. Then she cried a little, not from sadness, from something much closer to relief. She also started seeing a therapist, not because she was in crisis. She wanted to be clear about that when she first walked into the office and sat down. She said, "I am not falling apart. I just want to understand some things about myself, about why I let things go on as long as I did. I don't want to do that again." The therapist said that was a very good reason to be there. The sessions were not always comfortable. There were things she had to look at that she had been carefully not looking at, like the fact that she had confused being needed with being loved, like the fact that she had spent years taking care of everyone around her, partly because she was generous, and partly because as long as she was busy taking care of things, she did not have to sit with how lonely she was. She sat with it now. It was uncomfortable. It was also, gradually, freeing. And then there were the ordinary moments that surprised her most. The Saturday mornings with nowhere to be, and nothing expected of her. The way she could leave the kitchen exactly as messy as she felt like leaving it. The way she could decide at 9 in the evening to watch a film she wanted to watch without negotiating or compromising. The way she could invite her sister for dinner and talk for 4 hours without keeping one ear trained for the sound of a key in the door. She had forgotten that her life could have that quality, that simple, uncomplicated quality of being your own. About 6 weeks after she left, he showed up at his friend's house late at night. His friend opened the door and could tell immediately that something had shifted in him, because the particular brand of confidence that he always carried, that almost physical certainty that he occupied a room with, was gone. He looked, his friend said later, like a man who had been taken apart and not yet put back together. They sat in his friend's kitchen. His friend poured drinks, and for a long time nobody said anything. Then he said, "I think I lost her, not when she left." I think I lost her a long time ago and I was too busy to notice. Or maybe I don't know. I don't know. His friend nodded, still did not say anything. He had learned over the years that this man needed space to arrive at the actual thing he was trying to say, and if you talked too soon, you interrupted the journey. After a while, he said, "She asked me to go to counseling. In year 5, did I ever tell you that?" His friend said he did not think he had. He said, "I told her we didn't have those kinds of problems. I actually said that. I told her we were fine." He shook his head slowly. "How did I think we were fine? What was I comparing us to? What does fine even mean if the person next to you is disappearing and you are too comfortable to see it?" His friend asked him a question. He said, "What did she tell you she needed? Over the years, what did she actually say, and what did you do with it?" He thought about this for a very long time. Then he said quietly, "She said she needed me to be present. She said it in different ways, in different conversations. She said she felt lonely sometimes. She said she wanted us to talk more, not about work or logistics, but just talk. She said she wanted to feel like I was interested in her life." He paused. "I would listen, and I would think, okay, I will do better. And then the next day, I would walk back into my life, and it was like the conversation had not happened." His friend said nothing, which was the right thing to say. He went home that night and did not sleep. He lay in the bedroom that still smelled faintly like her, and he thought about 7 years of dinners he had been late for, conversations he had ended early, plans he had canceled, compliments he had not given, questions he had not asked. He thought about the architecture project she had turned down in year 3. He thought about the journal she kept on the nightstand, whose title he had once noticed, "Things I No Longer Say Out Loud," and had never once asked about. He had not asked because somewhere in the part of him he did not examine very often. He had assumed that her inner life was less urgent than the outer life he was building. He had assumed, without ever putting it into words, that her job was to support his momentum, and that this was an arrangement she had agreed to. Lying in the dark at 3 in the morning, he understood something clearly for the first time. She had never agreed to that. He had just stopped asking her opinion after the first year or two, and her silence had looked like agreement to him. But silence, he was starting to understand, is not agreement. Sometimes silence is what a person does when they have run out of ways to say the same thing. 3 months passed. Their lives ran on parallel tracks that did not touch. She went back to work part-time at the architecture firm. On the 3rd week, her boss handed her a set of plans for a community center project and said he wanted her perspective. She stayed an hour late that evening, not because anyone asked her to, but because she was genuinely interested, genuinely alive in the problem, and it was a feeling she had almost forgotten she was capable of. She started going back to an exercise class she had stopped attending 3 years ago because it was on a Tuesday evening, and he had started coming home late on Tuesdays, and she had not wanted to not be there. She went back on the first Tuesday, and the instructor greeted her as though no time had passed, and 2 women she used to talk to in the changing room said they had missed seeing her, and she stood there in the changing room thinking, "I gave up Tuesdays. I gave up this room. I gave up these small, real things. For what?" She did not miss him exactly, or rather, she missed the version of him that she had married, the man who had remembered small details and stayed on the phone until 2 in the morning. That person she missed, occasionally, in the way you miss a place you loved that has now changed beyond recognition. But the man he had become over 7 years, the man who looked at her across dinner and saw nothing in particular, that man she did not miss at all. He, meanwhile, was beginning the slower and messier process of actually looking at himself. He started seeing a therapist too. This surprised everyone who knew him, including himself. He went the first time because he was not sleeping and thought maybe talking to someone would help him sleep. He went the second time because the first session had pulled on something he had not expected. He went every week after that because he had started to understand that the person he was going to have to sit with and be honest about was himself. And that was the most uncomfortable work he had ever done, and also possibly the most necessary. His therapist asked him, in the 4th session, to describe a moment in the last 7 years when he had made his wife feel truly seen and valued. He began to answer and then stopped. He tried again. He kept getting partway through a memory and then realizing that in the memory, actually, he was the focus. He had planned the holiday, but it was the holiday he wanted. He had come to her work event, but he had left early. He had said he was proud of her, but immediately followed it with something about his own week. He came home from that session and sat in the kitchen for a long time. His house was very clean and very quiet. The candle holder she had lit that last Tuesday was still on the table. He had never moved it. 8 weeks after she left, almost to the day, he sat down and wrote her a letter. He wrote it by hand, 3 pages, front and back. He wrote it, crossed things out, started sections over, crossed them out again. It took him most of a Sunday. He did not beg in the letter. He had thought about begging. He had imagined a version of himself showing up at wherever she was and making promises and explaining how much he needed her back. But sitting in that quiet house with the candle holder on the table, he understood that asking her to come back was the same old thing dressed in new clothes. It was still about him. It was still him deciding what the next chapter looked like and assuming she would arrive to support it. So instead, he wrote her the truth. He wrote, "I have been trying to understand what happened between us, not to make sense of it in a way that lets me off the hook, actually understand it. And what I keep coming back to is this. I spent 7 years being the most important person in the story of our marriage. I told myself that was because I was the one building something, the one under pressure, the one holding the weight of our future. I made that story very convincing, including to myself. But the truth is that I was afraid. I was afraid of needing you the way a person actually needs another person, where you are genuinely seen, where there is genuine dependence, where you can genuinely be disappointed. I kept you at a distance that I called love. I confused being admired with being close. And somewhere in those 7 years, I stopped asking who you were becoming and started taking it for granted that you would just keep being the person standing beside me." He wrote, "I've learned to be careful with that word, ended, because the thing I'm describing didn't end so much as exhaust itself. I am telling you this because you spent 7 years saying true things to me and I kept changing the subject, and I thought the very least I owed you was one true thing in return." He addressed it to her sister, asked her to pass it on only if she thought it was appropriate. Her sister read it first, which he had expected she would. Then her sister said she would give it to her. She read it at her kitchen table on a Wednesday evening, with a cup of tea going cold beside her. She read it twice. Then she sat quietly for a while. Then she opened her journal. Not the old one, she had left that in the house, but a new one she had started the week after she moved in. And she wrote underneath that day's entry, "He finally said a true thing. I do not know what to do with it yet, but it mattered. I think it mattered." She did not call him, but she did not put the letter away. She left it on the kitchen table for several days, the way you leave something you are not finished thinking about. They met, finally, about 4 months after she left. She had suggested it, or rather, she had texted through her sister that she was willing to meet if he wanted to talk properly. He replied within 2 minutes. They met in a coffee shop midway between where they both lived. She arrived first and sat at a table by the window and ordered tea. When he walked in, she watched him cross the room and noticed that he looked different. Not just tired, different in a deeper way, like something had been rearranged inside him. She recognized the feeling because she had felt it in herself. He sat down. He did not try to hug her. She had not expected him to. He had never been especially affectionate in public even when things were good. He said, "Thank you for agreeing to this." She said, "I didn't want us to keep going without this conversation. Whatever comes next, I wanted us to actually talk first. We never really did that enough." He said, "I know." And that was different too. There was no version of that answer that was also slightly about him. It was just, "I know." They talked for nearly 2 hours. It was not a comfortable conversation. There were moments of silence that stretched. There were things she said that were hard for him to receive, and he received them without redirecting. There were things he said that she had needed to hear for a long time, and hearing them now was both better and sadder than she had imagined. better because they were true, sadder because they were 4 years too late. She told him about the architecture project she had turned down in year 3. She had never told him that the turning it down had been a wound that had not fully healed. She had never told him how often she thought about who she might have become if she had taken it. He listened. He did not say, "You could have told me," or "I didn't know it meant that much." He just listened, and when she finished, he said, "I'm sorry. For that specifically. You deserved someone who asked more questions." She told him that she had loved him, past tense, and she meant it as past tense, and she said that clearly. She told him that the love had been real, and the decision to leave had been one of the hardest things she had ever done, and the reason it had been hard was not because she doubted it, but because she had loved him, and leaving someone you love, even when it is right, is not painless. He said, "I know. I think I knew, even when I told myself you would come back. I think part of me knew you had made a real decision, and that it was made from a real and honest place, and I wasn't ready to look at that yet." She looked at him across the coffee shop table and felt something she had not expected to feel, not a desire to go back, but something like a complicated peace, like a chapter that had been in the middle of a sentence for years had finally reached its full stop. What happened after their meeting is, in some ways, the simplest part of the story. She did not go back. Not because the conversation was not meaningful. It was. Not because he was not genuinely different. He was, or at least he was beginning to be. But because she had discovered, in 4 months of living alone, that the woman who had left that house was not someone she wanted to fold back up and put away. She had started to take up her own space again, and she was not willing to give that up. She had learned that she had things to say, and places to be, and a career to rebuild, and a self to return to. She had learned that her contentment was not something that came from managing someone else's comfort. She had learned, and this was the hardest lesson and also the most valuable, that being good at loving someone is not the same thing as being in the right relationship for you. She continued with the therapy. She continued with the architecture work. She continued with Tuesday exercise classes and long baths, and calls with her sister that went on for 2 hours. She continued with her new journal. She continued with a life that felt, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely like her own. He continued with his therapy too. He continued with the slower, harder work of understanding the patterns he had carried, not just in the marriage, but long before it, where he had learned to confuse control with love, where he had learned to see a woman's tolerance as permission, where he had learned to equate success in the world with worth as a person. These were not quick or comfortable realizations. They were the kind of work that takes years and has no single breakthrough moment, just a gradual accumulation of honesty. They did not become enemies. When they spoke, occasionally, around practical things, they were civil and even kind. There was grief on both sides, but no bitterness. She had decided early on that she was not going to carry anger any further than she needed to. The anger had been useful. It had given her the momentum to leave, but it was not something she wanted to live inside long term. She wanted to be free of the marriage and free of the weight of it, and carrying resentment was just another way of staying attached. He grieved differently. He grieved by learning things about himself that he should have learned much earlier. He grieved through the slow process of becoming someone who was less afraid of real closeness. He could not do that inside the relationship he had with her. It had too much history, too much accumulated hurt, too much of the old dynamic baked into every interaction. But he could do it in the wider work of his life. And slowly, in the way these things happen when a person decides to be honest with themselves, he began to. There is a version of this story where the man realizes his mistakes and the woman comes back and everything is transformed into something beautiful. That version is very popular. People like that version. But this story is a true one, and the truth is often quieter and more complicated than the stories we like best. The truth of this story is that she spent 7 years slowly disappearing inside a marriage to a man who had stopped noticing she was there. The truth is that she left so quietly and so completely that it took days for him to fully understand she was gone. The truth is that he had been so certain she would come back, had built such a complete picture of himself as the person she could not live without, that her choosing not to come back was the single most educational moment of his adult life. And the truth is that she was not the kind of person who left with noise. She was the kind of person who left with clarity. And those are the leavings that stay with you, not because they were dramatic, but because they were decided. Because you can feel, in the very quality of the silence they leave behind, that they were not made in emotion, they were made in understanding. He had told himself with complete confidence that she would beg to return. She had surprised them both. She had not needed to beg. She had not needed to return. She had needed, and this, in the end, is the whole story. She had needed to remember who she was before she became the background of someone else's life. And once she remembered, there was no going back from that, because the woman who walked out that door had not left on impulse. She had been waiting at that door for years, carrying her life carefully, quietly hoping someone would notice she was ready to be seen. When no one did, she opened the door herself, and she walked out into her own life, quietly, without looking back. End.